Hi, I'm so glad you joined me today. This is Dr. Stevens with Integrative Health Haven. I'm going to talk to you about dairy today, talk to you about why it's an issue, some of the myths regarding it, and what I like to do instead. I've got some notes here. I'm going to incorporate some studies, so I really hope that you guys enjoy this and learn from it. Okay, first I want to debunk some myths about dairy. So, the one thing that people always say, I feel like, is, oh, you have to drink your milk because you want to make your bones strong. This is really a complete myth. Dairy doesn't make your bones stronger. So, I'm going to use some studies here so that you guys know I'm not crazy. But the first one, this is from British Medical Journal. It was a literature review of randomized controlled trials as well as cohort studies, and they were studying dietary calcium, milk or dairy intake, calcium supplements, and then how that affects fractures in participants aged greater than 50. I'm going to read from the results section here, and this is what they found. Dietary calcium intake is not associated with risk of fracture, and there is no clinical trial evidence that increasing calcium intake from dietary sources prevents fracture. Evidence that calcium supplements prevent fracture is weak and inconsistent. That really speaks for itself, but let's look at another one. Okay, this is from the Archives of Internal Medicine. And again, I'm just going to read from the results section because it really summarizes findings. So this was a 5-year double-blind placebo-controlled study, and they were giving calcium carbonate or placebo and looking at the incidence of osteoporotic fractures and adverse events. So they found that calcium supplementation did not significantly reduce fracture risk. So this is from their conclusion statement. They found that supplementing with calcium was ineffective as a public health intervention in preventing clinical fractures in ambulatory elderly. All right. Again, another study. This one comes from the Journal of Bone Metabolism. This one I'm going to read a little bit more because it kind of gives you a background about why the dairy industry kind of even came to be known for calcium and helping your bones. So this says advocacy for the use of calcium supplements arose at a time when there were no other effective interventions for the prevention of osteoporosis. Their promotion was based on the belief that increasing calcium intake would increase bone formation. Our current understandings of the biology of bone suggest that this is not likely to occur. There may be evidence that calcium acts as a weak anti-resorptive agent through its suppression of parathyroid hormone secretion, and this may be the mechanism that contributes to the slowing of postmenopausal bone loss if you supplement with calcium. Despite this, recent meta-analyses suggest no benefit from the use of calcium supplements in fracture prevention. In fact, there is evidence of adverse effects of calcium supplementation on hip fracture risk. Okay, so again, these are all research studies, and they are all concluding the same thing, that extra calcium, including calcium in dairy alone, does not strengthen your bones and does not prevent fractures. Okay, let that sit in. All right, so now let me talk to you a little bit more about why dairy is not the answer to any of your problems. Okay, so first I want to talk to you about something that little people know. So most people inherently lose their ability to digest lactose around age 2 to 5. This is because when God designed us, He made us to be able to digest our mom's milk. Okay, so there's an enzyme that we carry called lactase, and that helps us to process lactose, which is the sugar that's found in breast milk and cow's milk. Okay, but around age 2 to 5, we're meant to wean from breast milk and rely on dietary sources to get our nutrients, minerals, and fuel our body. Okay, so inherently, we are not made to digest lactose. Humans are also the only mammalian animal species that drink milk as adults, and let alone another animal's milk. Okay, so that in itself, you can kind of see why there's some issues with that thought process. All right, so moving on. One of the other issues with dairy is that it's very inflammatory. And if you've heard any of the recent, health kicks and sayings, chronic inflammation feeds chronic disease, or chronic inflammation equals chronic disease. Chronic disease is something that we're all trying to prevent. So why would we want to consume something that is going to cause constant inflammation? Okay, so why is dairy inflammatory? There's a number of reasons for this. And again, I've looked at a lot of research. I've, listened to all sorts of people about, the ideas of this, and this is what I've come up with. Okay, so one issue is the way that we treat and pasteurize milk. Dairy milk from cows, just like breast milk, has delicate proteins, enzymes, and immunoglobulins that can, under high heat, denature. When that happens, it can make those elements inactive or harmful to us, drastically reducing its ability to work in our body. Okay, so just like they tell you, don't heat your breast milk in the microwave, same thing here. Don't heat the milk. It literally changes the nutritional content of the milk. Okay, so another piece of this heating process is that it can kill natural vitamin C in the milk. It can convert lactose to beta lactose, which can adversely affect blood glucose more significantly than just lactose. Okay, so it can raise your glucose, and it alters calcium into a form of calcium that's harder for us to absorb. So the reason that we're drinking milk for the calcium is pretty much negated because the milk is being pasteurized, heated, and changed so that the calcium that we're trying to intake is much less absorbable. Another component of what we do to the milk is homogenization under this process. So if you look at breast milk, if you're a mom or if you are a dad and you've had breast milk in your house, you'll know that when it sits, it separates into kind of the more water content and the fat content. Well, cow's milk also does this when left alone. However, in order to make milk more appealing to people and, more convenient in a mixture that's the same throughout and is not going to separate, they put it through a process called homogenization that makes it so that it doesn't separate. So this process stops water and fat separation and changes the proteins in the milk, and this can lead to decreased absorption of the protein in the contents in the milk, as well as increase in allergies. Another issue regarding why dairy is so inflammatory is what we're inheriting from the cow. So 10,000 years ago, cows were grass-fed, they grazed in pastures, and nothing else was done to them to change or alter the contents of their milk. Now we feed cows a variety diet, which can decrease the anti-inflammatory omega-3s that unaltered cow's milk has, can decrease vitamin E, which is also anti-inflammatory, can decrease beta carotene, can decrease antioxidants, which help us with free radicals and, detoxifying. So basically all the things that could have been good about the milk are being negated by what we're doing to the milk. Another issue with the milk and kind of the state of the cow is that, dairy farms can be a very stressful environment for animals. And so the milk that they produce can have an increased amount of stressed hormones, which we then inherit and ingest when we consume the dairy products. And this can have a number of effects that I'll talk about later in the video if you stick around. So I mentioned that, cows that were grass-fed and pasture-raised were healthier than the cows that we have now, or a lot of the cows that we have now. But even if something is organic and, pasture raised, grass fed, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't mean that the processing of the milk, if it's being pasteurized, isn't negating all of those good effects, because it definitely is. So just because it says organic milk or organic grass-fed milk or milk from organic grass-fed cows, that doesn't mean that it's automatically awesome for you, okay? It can still be inflammatory, not have the nutrients that you're looking for. So stick around. I'll talk to you about what you can do about this. Another problem with cows, again, this is just kind of the source, is that in the US, most of our cows are Holstein cows, and we've used Holstein because they produce more milk than other breeds of cow. However, if we look back in history, all cows used to produce A2. This was a protein in their milk, which was a type of beta casein. However, over several thousand years, there was a genetic mutation that changed the casein. And that change produced a different type of protein, which we now call A1. Studies have shown that A1 milk is harder to digest and is linked to heart disease. What do you think most of the cows in the US that we're consuming produce? You got it. A1 milk. Harder to digest, more inflammatory, leading to chronic disease. So one side note here, there are some cow breeds, don't ask me where they are, but I know there are some around the world that still produce the A2 milk. These breeds tend to be the Jersey cows, the Normandies, and the Guernseys. May not be saying that right, but those three breeds typically produce A2 milk, which is the variety that is more easily digested and less inflammatory. So if you're looking for milk, you might want to start by looking for a local farm that has those breeds of cows. Okay, so I told you I was going to get back to the hormones in the milk and what that can do for us. Okay, so hormones, there are natural and artificial hormones that can be in cow's milk. Again, if we think about a cow in a stressful situation, the hormones in their milk are going to change. Okay, and the hormones in the milk that change are that they can have an increase in estrogen and progesterone, which then leads to us consuming increased amount of estrogen. If you know anything about estrogen, it leads to cancer. Okay, so free estrogen in the body literally leads to cancer. So cow's milk, processed from a cow that's in a stressful situation, not only is it going to be inflammatory because of the proteins in the milk and the lactose, but also you may have an increased risk of developing cancer. Another problem with a lot of our dairy products today is that they have artificial RBST in them. This is a basically growth hormone that's given to cows. It's synthetic and it's meant to increase their milk supply. This is so that the dairy industry can have a better profit margin off of their cows. Again, stress the cows out, make them produce the most milk possible, and then we'll sell that to everybody. Great idea, right? Not so much. Okay, moving on. So not only is this RBST not great for humans, but also there are studies that show that it's harmful to cows. So cows that have artificial RBST have increased amount of illnesses, and this then leads to the use of antibiotics. Antibiotics can be a whole nother topic, but antibiotics basically kill all of the good bacteria and all of the bad bacteria, altering the gut microbiome. When we have milk produced from these cows that have this synthetic growth hormone that's increasing our risk of cancer, we're also inherently getting the antibiotics that they've been treated with due to their illnesses, and therefore we can alter our gut microbiome as well. Okay, so this RBST, it already has so many negative effects, but I'm not done yet. Okay, so one other effect that RBST has is that it can increase growth factor 1, or is that it can increase insulin-like growth factor 1. The increase in this can lead to an increased risk of cancer-forming cells, again, increasing your risk of cancer. All right, so we've talked about how cows have changed over the years, how what we've fed them has changed, how what we've done to the milk has changed, and how that impacts the nutrients we get from the milk and the pathway of inflammation in our bodies. If this isn't enough to convince you that dairy is not the answer, let me keep going. Okay, so casein is one of the proteins in milk, and it's not well tolerated by a lot of people. And there's actually been evidence that about 50% of people that are intolerant to gluten will also be intolerant to casein. Oh, there is one thing I forgot to mention. So the RBST that I was talking about earlier, which again, if you remember, is that synthetic growth hormone given to cows to try to increase their milk production. So that is banned in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Europe. Not in the US. Why? Why are we allowing something that is so bad for us to continue to happen, and bad for animals? Bad on two aspects. I don't understand. But that's okay. We don't have to consume the dairy. Okay, so let's get back to the chronic inflammation. So chronic inflammation leads to chronic disease. But chronic inflammation, a step of that is that it leads to leaky gut. So chronic inflammation, even small amounts of chronic inflammation, break down the gut junctions that are supposed to be tight, okay? They become more loose. And then particles of food, toxins essentially, that are not supposed to be outside of the gut wall are able to leak into our bloodstream and then be carried to our tissues. What's the problem with this? Well, this is where we can see autoimmune disease. So our body, again, these food particles are not supposed to be in the bloodstream, and then they deposit in the tissues. So wherever they deposit in the tissue, the body then sees these things as foreign and will attack the tissue that these particles are resting in. That's where we can see issues with the thyroid, issues with arthritis in our joints, issues with our gut, and just dysfunction with IBS and constipation and bloating and different things like that. So many different things. And if you know anything about autoimmune disease, you know that once you're diagnosed with one autoimmune disease, you're at a significantly increased risk of developing multiple autoimmune diseases. So what can you do? You might say, well, I've been consuming dairy. My stomach doesn't hurt. I don't throw up from it. I don't think I have a problem with it. Well, it's all about toxic load. So our body's meant to keep us healthy. You know, God designed us in a way that our body fights things that invade it and does this pretty efficiently until the toxic load is too great. So as a child, you may not see the effect of some of these things. However, as everyone has a bucket, okay, and that bucket is only so big. People have different sized buckets because not everyone's the same, but if your bucket is this big, once it overflows and your body can't keep up with it, that's when we start to see the chronic disease, the issues, the IBS, the tummy pain, the cramping, the autoimmune disease, all of it, okay? So even if you don't inherently feel like dairy affects you, I can promise you that far greater amount of people are affected by dairy than they think. And I've seen this in lab work with both dairy and gluten. People say, well, I don't think it affects me. I don't feel any different when I eat it. It doesn't make my stomach hurt. It doesn't make me have diarrhea, whatever. But the lab work supports that it's causing inflammation. I've seen elevated CRPs. I've seen elevated secretory IgAs. I've seen lots of things that prove that it's affecting them even if they don't feel it physically, okay? Maybe you're still not buying in. I want to challenge you. Take 2 weeks. Take out all dairy products. Take out milk, yogurt, cheese. Goat cheese doesn't count. You can have goat cheese or sheep cheese, cashew cheese even. But dairy, cow's milk, cheese, cottage cheese, ice cream, all of it. Take it out for 2 weeks and see how you feel. The real test might come when you add it back in after having it out for those 2 weeks. I bet you'll notice improvement in your sinuses, improvement in your allergies, decreased headaches, decrease in bowel symptoms, and many other things, energy levels, fatigue, things that you don't even think are related, you might be surprised by. So that's my challenge to you. Okay, I want to wrap this up with one last piece here. This is what I like to do, some dairy alternatives. Okay, so a lot of people are on like a soy milk kick, and they think that that's better than cow's milk. Not so much. I'll have to make a whole nother video on soy, but basically soy increases free estrogen and can increase the risk of cancer. Okay, so alternatives: almond milk, cashew milk, coconut milk. Again, you want to get these organic if you can, just because things that aren't organic are sprayed with pesticides, glyphosate, toxic chemicals that then can affect us when we consume them, and we can take in the pesticide residue and have some negative health effects from that. So organic if you can. And then you might say, okay, well, like, what about calcium intake, right? Well, we already kind of went through some of those studies that calcium intake doesn't really make your bones stronger, but we all do need calcium, probably not in the amount that the dairy industry says we do, but we all definitely do need calcium, okay? So what you can do is tons of leafy greens, broccoli, kale, chia seeds, things like that. Fish with the bones still intact when you cook them. Those all are great sources of calcium and much more easily absorbed than this inflammatory dairy. And then what you need to do is you need to make sure that you have enough vitamin D and vitamin K that your calcium can be put where it needs to be back into your bones and not be free circulating, because free circulating calcium is where we can see atherosclerosis, which leads to cardiovascular effects, kidney stones, varicose veins, cataracts. Okay, so free floating calcium is not good. And that's what we get a lot when we just do dairy products, because we don't have the right nutrients and the right minerals and vitamins to put everything where it goes and to not cause inflammation. Okay, so these are some alternatives that you can do. There's also, some research to support that maybe people can do raw dairy products. You have to be careful with raw dairy products because, there's some concern with having disease or, viruses present in them. So you have to kind of make sure that you have a clean source. It's, tested for parasites and viruses and bacteria so that you don't have an insult to the gut from that. But raw dairy products may be better because they're not pasteurized. The milk isn't changed. Cows might be in a less stressful environment. Again, but I have to caution you with this. And again, this is not medical advice, but this is my own opinion. But yeah, so there's some alternatives that you can do and why dairy is not good for you. And I hope that you've enjoyed this, that it's helped you, your family, and your friends. Keep following me for more content. I hope to see you soon. Bye.